sure, Isaac, you're very familiar with. And he's a famous Lithuanian professor of Yiddish. He was at Oxford University for 18 years. He was at Yale University for a number of years. And he came to speak to us in Vilna. And what was so heart-wrenching when we spoke to him was that that at the moment there is a major controversy that is reigning in Lithuania, in that the Lithuanian government are trying to equate the suffering of the Lithuanians under the Soviets with the suffering that the Jews suffered under the Nazis in Machshamam V'Zichram. And people like David Katz and many others, Ephraim Zurov is one of them, we'll talk about him in a moment, have stood up and said, how dare anybody try and draw a parallel between the suffering of the Jews under the Nazis, which was a genocide, as opposed to the ideological war which took place in Eastern Europe between the Soviets and the Lithuanians. And as a result, he has been ostracized and he's lost his position in the academic world. And we were just hearing from him firsthand the personal cost that it's come at, but he has stood his ground and he has stood firm, and he said nobody should ever dare make that equation.
If I might interrupt, he had to go to Scotland or Ireland. He had to go to Ireland because he actually couldn't get a job, so he was a helper in a second-hand bookshop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here is a world-famous Yiddish professor that has to go to Ireland in order to work.
And his book that he's published is an absolute masterpiece. Have you seen the book?
Yes,
brilliant,
absolutely.
unbelievable.
Masterpiece. He wrote.
It's a masterpiece, that book.
Yeah.
And by the way, it is available but as a reference book at the Biyachad Library. For anyone who wants to go and see it, it's definitely there.
Do you know what it's called?
It's something about Lithuanian Jewry, but I'll get the name for you. We're just going to take an ad break. We'll be back in a few moments. Now listen on.
Get on the video now.
Yes, I'll get it.
I was waiting for
We're for life. Some stations are for the news. Some are for the music.
Just to tell you that this program is repeated tonight at 7.
That's why we make really good radio for you. In flavors of
Just got to do two. I got to read out one advert.
the yummy.
And I got to pay for the station.
For all the news in between. We're there through the hard times, and we're there during the easy times. We're for the Ashkenazim,
And there's someone phones in.
somebody phones, yeah.
for the Bubbas and the Zetas, for the Immas and the Abbas, for the leaders and for the followers. And if there was an international day celebrating the life we live, we'd be for that too. At Chai FM, we're for life. We're for you.
You're listening to Talk of the Town with Isaac Resnick on 101.9 Chai FM.
Join Dr. Nimrod Mabeli as he talks beyond governance with the CEO of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Alan Makoki, Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. right here on 101.9 Chai FM. If you just tuned in, we have in the studio this morning Hugh Midon and Midon Mulwood, who've just returned to Lithuania, and I'm going to hand back over to Hugh, who will introduce Midon.
Well, Isaac, we were privileged to travel with a group of 38 people. The majority of our group were people that had come from South Africa. There were about 20 or 25 South Africans. We had people from Israel. We had a few people that came from Canada and a couple from the United States. And the reason that I linked up with David Wallace of Eddie's Kosher Travels is that when he was doing one of his tours to Europe, South African and ex-South African living in the States said to him, why don't you take South African Jews back to Lithuania, because those are their roots. And how right he was. He phoned South Africa, he phoned Howard and the chief rabbi, and eventually he found his way to me. And we've now linked up, and we hope to be doing many more of these tours in the future. But what was so special was that the people in our group, as I said when we began, we feel like a family, because there were people that experienced so many deep and beautiful experiences in that when we encouraged people before they went to try and do research, where they came from, which Stetlach their parents came from, in the hope that they would be able to find something connected to their family. We also made people available that would help with genealogical research, and they did that prior to us arriving in Lithuania. And we have with us Mignon Millwood. She came together with her two sisters, Susan Bleeden and June Edery. So we had the three sisters on the trip with us.
Don't forget my husband too.
Well, I'm talking first about the fact that we had the three sisters, which was a
Okay.
group in itself, and of course we had your husband Edgar with us. And I know that Isaac knows a lot about the Millwoodskis, which is where Millwood is from, which is a whole discussion in itself. But I thought, Mignon, it would be wonderful to have you with us this morning to share with all the listeners the incredible experiences that you had and the finds that you made.
Okay, so once I actually found out that, once we decided we were actually going to go with Hugh to Lithuania, I actually decided I was going to investigate and find out as much as I could about the places where my father was born, which was Kovna, and where he went to live from the age of 2 till 6 after his father had left Lithuania and come to South Africa, and that was a village called Vilkaviškis. So the first place I actually went onto, the first website was Jewish Genealogy, and it was absolutely incredible what I found there. We were all under the impression that my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, on his mother's side, maternal grandmother, had actually died during the Holocaust. And when I went on to Jewish Gen, I actually discovered that she hadn't died in the Holocaust. She actually died in 1931, before my father and his mom left to come to South Africa. And on the website, I actually found a picture of her tombstone in the Vilkaviškis cemetery. So there I had something that I was actually going to go visit, which made it exceptionally exciting for me. Then it was incredible what I found on the website. I found details of my Boba's marriage, where she got married, and who the witnesses were, and the date of the marriage, and how old she was, and how old my grandfather was. I found details of her sister that got married, of my great-grandmother's sister. It's just unbelievable what you can actually find. And but I still wanted to find out more about if I could find addresses. And I was just very persistent, and as Isaac mentioned, I actually had a postcard that I came to speak to him about, to ask if he could decipher an address. And but I couldn't actually discover anything while I was in South Africa on Kovna. What I also found out more about Vilkaviškis, just before we were leaving, the Thursday night, we were leaving on the Tuesday morning, and on the Thursday night before we were leaving, I found a website linking to a gentleman called Ralph Salinger, who lives in Kfar Rupen, Kibbutz Kfar Rupen in Israel. And his roots were from Vilkaviškis, and he's gone to great lengths to actually find out and to publish as much data about Vilkaviškis as he has been able to find. In fact, he was the one that was responsible for taking a photograph of the actual tombstone in the cemetery. Him and another gentleman had gone out and cleared the cemetery. And on the Thursday night, I actually found his address, and I actually wrote to him, and I said to him there were two things I wanted to know. Number one, could he possibly give me an address of the Lipovsky family? My Baba was a Lipovsky. And could he possibly give me, I'd seen somewhere that there was a map, a hand-drawn map of Vilkaviškis. So I asked him if he could possibly send those to me, if he had access to them. And on the Friday, just before Shabbos, he actually sent me, number one, the address where the Lipovskis had lived, and number two, he had sent me this hand-drawn map by a woman called Vora Dolev, who had lived in Vilkaviškis until 1937. And not only was there a list of the landmarks, but it showed the location of the homes or the surnames of all the Jewish families. And there on this map was the name Lipovsky that lived at 29 Kostusha Street. So there I actually had an address. I had a map of exactly where my dad had lived from the age of 2 till 6 years. Anyway, once I arrived in Lithuania, we were in Riga on our first night, and I approached our guide, a gentleman by the name of what's his name? Zulik, not Zulik. Yulik, thank you, Yulik. And I showed him the postcard that I had, and I said, "Can you possibly see an address?" He took one look at it. He said, "Yes, of course there's an address in Kaunas." When we write addresses, we put the person's name, then below that we put their street address, and then we put the city, the suburb. What they do is they put the actual suburb or the city, and then they put the address below. So in our case, it was written to Sonia Klugman, it was Shana Klugman, and then it said Kaunas, which is Corvin, and then below that, Lyceville 57. So there I had an address. And the following night, we actually went for a walk, and we were walking along this beautiful boulevard called Liberty Boulevard, which was a whole shopping boulevard. And our guide came up to me and he said to me, "What was that address on the postcard?" So I gave him the postcard. He says, "Just hold on 1 second." We walked a bit further, and suddenly he pointed to a building. And he said to me, "What's that address?" And I said, "It says 57 Lyceville Street." He says, "Well, this is where the postcard was sent to." And there we were standing in front of this modern building. It certainly wasn't the original building where my father had lived, or otherwise my Boba had worked. I'm not sure which one it was. But there it was. We were standing at that same address that was written on this postcard. It was the most incredible feeling. And that was experience number one. And the most amazing thing was how the whole group were so excited for us. It was as though it was their personal experience. And then the following day we went off to Wilkowiczkis. We went on our own private tour. We broke away from the group. And we arrived in Wilkowiczk, and our gentle driver hadn't actually done his homework, so he didn't really know much about Wilkowiczkis. But when we arrived there, he took us to the street that was actually on this map that I mentioned before. And so he looked for this number, 29 Katusha Street, and he said, obviously it was destroyed. And he went on to tell us that after the war, there were only 48 houses standing, and there was only 2 Jewish homes that were standing. And he said, it's all been renovated, you're unlikely to find it. But there's some old ladies, let's just ask them if they know where 29 Katusha Street was. And so we stopped these old ladies, they must have been in the 80s or possibly early 90s. And they nodded, they said, yes, we know exactly where that street was. In fact, yes, the Jewish house. And they led us to a house, this old house, pre-war house, which was surrounded by a whole lot of modern homes. The only house that was standing that was from pre-World War II time. And that was 29 Katusha Street. And there we were.
That's an absolute amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible. And that was the house where my father lived from the age of 2 till 6.
And that's what I find so beautiful about the tours that we do and the journeys that we do, that you're actually you put yourself in a time capsule. Many of the people in our group will remember that we went to some of the shtetl, we saw the wells, the operational wells. When we were driving on the bus towards the shtetl, we saw that man on his
donkey
with a horse and cart, just as it might have been 150 or 200 years ago. So what Midon is saying is, it's not only that we're going back to these places which look and feel and sound and smell the same, so to speak. You can actually find the buildings that your family occupied, and you can see how and where they lived.
Can I interrupt? You mentioned you had the tombstone. You've shown it me here.
Yes.
I'll show you one of our families, which is very unique. My brother's called Meisha Leib, named after my late grandfather. And we came from the shtetl called Krok, or Krakus. And
that's
the
where
Germans...
Where Solly Krok got his name from.
No,
originally, he's a Rakashika,
he's
but
a
the name
Rakashik,
Krok
yes,
came from the shtetl
And
Krok.
the Germans completely destroyed the cemetery in Krakus. But there was one tombstone standing only. And you couldn't read it. So there was a lady there. She said, look, I'll try and decipher it for you. She took some shaving cream and rubbed it on the tombstone. And it's the tombstone of my late grandfather, Resnik Meisha Leib. The only standing tombstone in the whole of Krok.
Amazing.
This is amazing. And you say Judaism is a journey. There was a famous advert by a motor company, life is a journey, enjoy the ride.
Absolutely.
That's so important.
And enjoy every step of the way.
In step of the way. And I've always said in all my programs, it's so important, so essential that our children and the grandchildren know their roots. If you don't know your past, you don't have a future.
And they must
so
find out now.
Over to you now, because you showed me something which is absolutely unique.
Absolutely. When you go on these journeys, you actually feel that there are the neshamas. You're accompanied by other people. It's almost like a mystical experience that you've made the effort to get up and go and explore. and then Hashem answers, the same way that you'll find a tombstone of somebody else. And I know several people have related stories where they're walking through a cemetery, they can't find anybody, any of the tombstones from their family, and one of the people told me he literally tripped over a stone that was sticking out the ground, realized it must have been a tombstone, unearthed it, and it was the tombstone of his great-grandfather.
It's
So
unbelievable.
I'll give you another story now, which is a more living story, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just being with Hugh just brings in HP moments. He's incredible. He just brings in people, and they just talk to us, and we just had the most incredible experiences because of Hugh.
Bless you. Thank you, Midon. So I'll give you one of those amazing stories that happened. We went to Slonim, and in Slonim, as is true of many of the other Shtetlach, you have this main square. Still to this day, you have the main square in the middle, which is where the marketplace used to be in the old days. And then all the side streets come off it in a kind of a grid, and then you go up the side streets to houses and various other places. So our bus stopped in the main square, and then one of us got off the bus and we walked towards the shul, which was about 2 blocks away. The shul itself was built in 1681. It's over 500 years old, and it's a Baroque shul, so it was very solidly built, very beautiful, with lovely arches inside and 4 big supports in the middle of the shul, pillars, and the bima was in the middle of the shul. But unfortunately, it's been left to go to rack and ruin, because as we know, the Jews were murdered in all of these places in about 1941. It was then taken over by the communists. They didn't invest anything in infrastructure, and who cared about an old synagogue of the Jews? So today there are vagrants that are living inside, and it was smelt quite ugly. It wasn't very pleasant inside. But what was beautiful was that we climbed in like through one of the side windows, and we walked into the shul, and you could even see some of the beautiful wall murals that were still on the wall. And we even saw for the Birkat Kohanim, you could see the hands of the Kohen right above where the Aron Kodesh used to be. There were other Hebrew inscriptions and psukim. And after we had been in the shul, we were standing outside, and one of the ladies that were with us, I think it was Sue Sherman, if I remember correctly. Sue Sherman from Cape Town.
Yeah.
She brought a flag, an Israeli flag with her. And she was carrying it. So I said to my daughter, and I said to Michelle, and my daughter Tali was with us, and I said, come, let's stand by the flag with the shul behind us. And a few people in the group came
Let's have photographs with the
to
flag.
take a photograph
Yeah.
with the flag behind. Before we knew it, everybody saw in our group, as they were walking up the side street, so to speak, to come closer to the shul, they saw that we had a flag and that some of us were congregating. So we all started standing around the flag, and I started singing Am Yisrael Chai, slowly and quietly. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai. And then slowly it started building, and each person that came into the group started singing, and it became louder and louder and louder. And we were surrounded by other buildings around us, and our voices were reverberating off the walls around the building. Am Yisrael, and we started singing with more and more passion. And the Gentiles in this shtetl that hadn't seen Jews for 75 years saw this group singing with passion and with joy with the Israeli flag. And then afterwards we finished off with Hatikva, which was an incredible moment.
People came from the shops and from every street. They were just congregating. We had such an audience. It was incredible.
This was our flash mob in Slonim.
Indescribable.
It was an amazing moment, and we had more, but we haven't got so much time to share. But as we were walking away from the shul, we were walking away, and a guy stops his car, a Belarusian, because now we're in Belarus, Slonim, and he's got his girlfriend in the car, and it's a really dirty car, and we're not sure what he wants with us. But he didn't look terribly hostile, but he wanted to talk to us. Anyway, our local guide who spoke Russian told him to move along, but he was quite persistent, and he stopped a block away because he knew we were on our way back to the bus on the main square. He gets out, and he opens up his boot, and he takes out this black book that I'm showing you here in the studio, a beautiful black book, and I was intrigued, and our group was intrigued, so we walked up to him and we looked at it, and I open it up and I see that it's a Tanakh printed in 1777.
1880.
I beg your pardon, in 1877 in Vienna. It's got Russian on the one side, Russian script, and it's got Hebrew for the Tanakh on the
And it's
other.
got someone's name in.
And it's got somebody's name in the cover, which is written in Russian, which we can't make out. So the guide says to him, are you a seller? So he says, no, he's a spiritual Jew. He reads the Russian every day. Okay, fine. So somebody said to me, Hugh, this book hasn't been part of the Jewish people for all these years. Show him the money, so to speak. So I took out my wallet, and I had a 50-euro note, and I showed it to him, and he looked at the book again, and he looked at the money, and then all of a sudden he wasn't so spiritually inclined, and the money was significant to him, and we did our transaction and everybody photographed it. And I was delighted that we had brought back this magnificent book, a Bible, back into the Jewish people that hadn't been with us for all these years, and probably you don't even know what happened to the owners of the book. So I thought we would go to the bus, and then I'm going to tell you the rest of the story in a moment.
Yeah, we're taking a break. We're back straight after them.
From top to
That's
from
amazing.
Johannesburg to Israel.
I'll tell you,
It's more customers. What he's going to take now.
101.9 High FM.
I mean, of all the persecuted
From
Jews.
the boardroom to the shop floor, business affects all of us. Join Dr. Nimrod Mbele
Not
as he
at
talks
all.
to the policymakers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and South Africa's top companies about lessons from the boardroom. Be sure to catch Beyond Governance Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m.
A walk down memory lane with our very own Jewish encyclopedia. It's Talk of the Town with Isaac Resnick, only on your station, 101.9 High FM.
They are talkative, they are charming, they have opinions, and they are young. If your child or grandchild is between the ages of 6 and 12 years old and they would like to be on radio, then you need to contact High FM. We are looking for young people to review play, venues, toys, and children's books on the High Kids Show. To get in touch, email info@highfm.com or call Mandy at the High FM office 061 082 3459. High Kids for Children by Children. So if you just tuned in, we have Hugh Reichland and Mignon Mildwood talking about their tour to Lithuania. And by the way, this program is repeated this evening at 7 p.m. So you continue now. You were telling us about this magnificent Tanakh that was handed to you by this gentleman.
So we walk back to the bus. Everybody gets on the bus, and I, as the scholar in residence, sat in the front with the microphone, and I thought I would read at least the first pasuk of the Tanakh to everybody, the first verse of the Tanakh to everybody. So there was a guy standing next to me. He said to me, "Hugh, don't do that. Close your eyes, close the Tanakh, open it, put your finger on a page, on a verse, and read that verse to all of us." I did that, and I opened up in Shmot chapter 18, Exodus chapter 18, and this is where my finger landed. Vayavo Amalek, vayilachem im Yisrael berefidim. And Amalek came. Amalek represents our eternal enemies that want to see the destruction of the Jewish people. Vayilachem, and they fought against im Yisrael, the people of Israel, berefidim, in a place called Refidim. And this is the famous incident where Moses was on a rock during that war against the Amalekites, where as long as his hands were up, and they were held up,
they were winning.
Correct. They were held up by Hur and by Yehoshua, and if his eyes were towards the heavens and his hands were towards the heavens, we would succeed in overcoming our enemies. And here we had just sung Am Yisrael Chai, that the Jewish people should live outside the synagogue, and here was Hashem, so to speak, saying to us, you see, you are the survivors. This group of people came back to Slonim to say, the shul might be derelict, but the people that prayed here are the same people that are praying all over the world to the same God, and they have survived.
Right. Unbelievable.
That was just one of the emotional moments of this tour, and we had many. I was sitting at the back of the bus, and the tears that were flowing after that incident were numerous.
I just interrupt? You mentioned Slonim. I wonder how many of our listeners know who the rabbi of Slonim was. But let me just tell you, before the Bolshevik Revolution, the Tsar of Russia it was a law that a picture of him had to be hung in every single public place, in synagogues, in schools, like we have in South Africa here. If you go to a government department, you see the picture of the president, whatever it is. So the Tsar of Russia was now visiting Slonim, and they knew he's going to come into the shul. But in that shul, the rabbi never allowed the photograph of the Tsar to be shown. The pictures were turned the other way, back, facing the wall. And someone came in when said the Tsar's coming, and the Tsar came in, and he was fuming. Why isn't my picture being seen? What's you insulting the Tsar? And the rabbi was a very clever rabbi, and he turned around and he says, no. He says, whoever he was, Your Majesty, whatever you call him. Why do we have to look at a painting we want to see the real person, you. That's what he answered him. And this story was told to me by late Rabbi Aloy, because Rabbi Aloy went to the Slonim Yeshiva.
Wow.
I
Okay.
want to tell you that. So, carry on, you've got other stories to tell.
Well, that was the one story. The other story was that we went to Kovna, and we went to the site of where the former Kovna ghetto was. And in fact, we even in that ghetto area, we also saw where the Rov of Kovna lived on the corner. It was where the Kovna Rov lived. It was a double-story wooden house. But as we were walking through the side streets, there was a gentleman that walked past. So I greeted him, and I asked him if there was anybody that he knew that was in that area that remembered the Jews, and he could speak English, thankfully. So he said, yes, my mother was alive before the war, before the Nazis came.
Mother-in-law.
Well, I beg your pardon, you're right. Thank you, Mignon. It was his mother-in-law. So we said, "Okay, we'll go with you to your mother-in-law, because she must be an old lady." He said, no, I'll bring her out into the street. So we were waiting in the street, and he went and he fetched his mother-in-law, and she walked out, a very beautiful old lady, walked nicely, slowly, came up to the group, and we started talking to her, and he was interpreting. Mignon, would you like to then?
Well, basically what she said was that she lived at the time when the Jews were in the ghetto, and how her best friends were Jews, and how she absolutely loved her Jewish friends, and that she was just so sad when they were taken. The impression I got was that she was telling a story of one day she was actually walking with one of her Jewish friends, a gentleman, a boy, and they were walking over a bridge, and the Germans were actually coming towards them, and this friend of hers actually saw the Germans come in. He jumped over the bridge, and she actually saw the Germans take a pot shot at him. And she was crying. She was so emotional. She said how she loved the Jews and how they were so good to her, and they were friends.
And that was a beautiful moment, because she was crying they were real tears that were
Tears
running down
of emotion.
of emotion. So, and that is what one feels. I think that for many people, they don't want to go back to these places because they say that everybody was an anti-Semite and they all murdered us. Well, when we started this program, we were talking about Professor David Katz, and we see over here that there are elements within Lithuanian society that want to rewrite history. And want to try and turn things around. And we do know, and in fact when I'll come back to it now, we met Ephraim Zurov. He came to speak to us for Su'udah Shlishit, that at the end of the Sabbath in Vilna. He came and he spoke to a group. We were at the Chabad house in Vilna. And he came to speak to us with a lady by the name of Ruta. And she has just published a book which hasn't been published yet in English. It's still going to come out, where she talks about the collaboration of the local Lithuanians.
So Hugh, she's a Gentile lady.
She's a Gentile, and in fact she's Ukrainian, and she did a little bit of research into her own family and found that I think it was her grandfather that was involved with the Nazis.
Her grandfather and her grandfather's brother. The one that actually made lists,
Right.
from what I remember correctly.
So,
Yeah.
and she now has to deal with this guilt that her own grandfather and his brother were Nazis. And so she started doing this research, and she started coming out with all this information from the archives. She has spent years going through the archives and has found out about the degree of collaboration between the Lithuanians and the Nazis. And we know that many of the Lithuanians started murdering the Jews even before the Nazis came in.
did, of course.
Absolutely.
Can I just intervene? You know, the Lithuanians were very similar to the Nazis, Yamach Shemor. They kept precise records of everything.
Yeah.
Birth certificates, death certificates.
Yeah.
Even we've got from my great-grandmother, even her death certificate to say she died of old age. That's how they kept every record. Like the Nazis, you know, when they would put the numbers on the hands, you know, before you went into the gas chambers, they kept a record of every single person.
Yeah.
The Lithuanians did the same as well.
Correct. So there is that element. On the other hand, it's also true to say that there were righteous Gentiles, and there were people that did save the Jews and that did rescue them, albeit that it was a minority of people.
And then you mentioned Kovnaf. What about that Japanese consul?
Absolutely. So Sugihara, so his name was Chuene Sugihara. He was actually born, I'll never forget, on the 1st of January 1900,
Yes.
at the turning of the 2 centuries. And he was an amazing human being because he saved 6,000 Jews. He was the Japanese consul in Kovna in 1940, and he could speak Russian. That was why the Japanese sent him there. And the boys of the Mir Yeshiva came up, they devised an amazing plan where they enlisted the help of the Dutch consulate, Mr. Zwartendijk, who said that Jews can go into Curacao, just off the United States, without an entrance visa. So they said to Sugihara, if you could just give us a transit visa to go through Japan to Curacao, we can save ourselves. Sugihara cabled, and I had a meeting with the Japanese ambassador in Pretoria about 2 years ago. And I went to his consulate and he showed me the actual cables that Sugihara had sent to Japan asking for permission. The Japanese government remained silent. And Sugihara, with his late wife Yukiko of blessed memory, they started writing out visas. And within a few weeks they wrote out 6,000, well, it was 2,000 visas, and 6,000 people escaped with those visas. And there are now 40,000 Jews in the world today because of Chuene and Yukiko Sugihara.
100%.
And he was the only man, the only Japanese person ever in history that was named as one of the righteous Gentiles. And he never wanted any recognition for what he did. Thank God, a few years before he passed away, and he lived as a pauper the rest of his life because he lost his position in the Foreign Service.
Yes.
So today, the Japanese have made him into a hero, but he wasn't in his lifetime. One of the survivors went to Japan and said, we need to find Sugihara to thank him. We have a duty to thank him. And they found him just before he passed away. And they said to him, please, Mr. Sugihara, let us do something to help you, to say thank you. He didn't want anything. And he said the following, and I repeated it, and I'm sure that Minion will remember it. Everybody will remember it on the bus. Everybody will remember it on the bus. Do what is right, because it is right, and
leave it at that.
Leave it alone. Do what is right because it is right, and leave it alone. And that's such a beautiful motto that I think everybody can learn from. But in the end, they prevailed upon him, and he said, okay, you can educate one of my sons at the Hebrew University. I can't afford it. And he was sent to Israel to the Hebrew University, where he became an engineer. And that was their way of paying it. So we went to his consulate. We went into the building where he and his family lived, where the consulate was. We went into the rooms. And if I could just encourage people, anybody that wants to see photographs of our trip, please look on Facebook. If you go to Hugh Reichlins, that's RAICHLIN', Jewish Heritage Travels, you will see the photographs and you'll see that flash mob that we spoke about. And also, we are going to be, please God, doing our trip again next year from the 10th to the 17th of May. Originally, we were going to do it again in 2018, but it seems that there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community, and we think that there will be demand. So
I strongly recommend it. It was life-changing.
It's essential that everyone goes. We're taking an ad break. We're back in a few moments.
The best part of your day.
That's Sugihara. There was a rabbi here called Rabbi Marvin Takaya, wrote a book called The Fugu Plan. I took him around the country, he stayed with me. Have you seen the book?
I've got the book. And I've got the movie. There's a movie. The Fugu fish can be
What's
deadly.
going on in the community? Let's find out with Isaac Resnick.
Welcome back. 8 minutes to 10. We have in the studio Hugh Reichlin and Mignon Mildwood. We're talking all about their recent trip to Lithuania. So carry on, Hugh. I'm sure there's so much to talk about.
Well, I think one of the other beautiful things was the Shabbos that we spent in Vilna. We stayed in really beautiful hotels, and I think that this is also what we strive to do in this trip, that we had luxurious hotels, a beautiful coach. We had kosher meals 3 times a day. We had a minion wherever we went, because we had not only minion Mulwood. But
I hope I did my bit.
You certainly did. Minion, I want to tell you, you and so many others on the journey really made it what it was, because it's, the stories, the enthusiasm that you showed.
Those personal experiences are just very special, and as I said before, that everyone actually joined in. And they felt it was their own personal experience, which made it just so much more special.
And what we did actually was, while we were traveling, we asked people in advance where their shtetl was, where their family shtetl was, and a private guide would then fetch you in the morning, take you out to your shtetl, and then you would join the group later in the day. So everybody had an opportunity to do the tour on a macro level, and then also to do the micro tour of their own particular
That's why
place.
Les Glassman, he went to
Mariampol.
Mariampol
Yeah.
with his family, and he found all all the family history there as well.
Correct. And Joan Struck, for example, she, the chief rabbi's mother-in-law,
Yes.
she went back to the shtetl where her father-in-law was from, and exactly as he had described, they had a smaller house and a bigger one next to the main square. She saw literally what he had been describing to the family for decades. She was able to see. But what I wanted to say about Vilna was that when we walked from the beautiful hotel, which was in the old quarter where they've now stopped cars coming through, they've made them pedestrian malls. It's really beautiful. Vilna and Kovna are two beautiful big cities that the Lithuanian government, since independence, has really spent money, renovating and beautifying. And we walked as a group. I think we must have had about 25 men in the group, and we walked with our talesim, because you can't carry in the streets. And we walked with our talesim from the hotel to the shul. And it was so beautiful the way people saw us in the streets, and they saw, these were the Jews of old. And they were back in the streets of Vilna walking to the synagogue.
Yeah, unbelievable. And tell me, you said you went to Radin as well, to where the Chofetz Chaim...
Correct. So we went to the shtetl of Radin, which is in Belarus. It was also part of Greater Lithuania. And we went to the shul where the Chofetz Chaim was the rabbi. And I gave a shiur, a lecture outside the shul of the one thing that the Chofetz Chaim is very famous for. Well, first of all, he's famous for his Mishnah Brura, which is where he writes down Jewish law. But the other thing was that he compiled an amazing book about the laws of Lashon Hara, about not speaking badly of other people, not speaking ill of others. And I spoke and I taught from his book, and we went over some of the laws about not speaking Lashon Hara about other people. And that's what we tried to do, that in each place, when we went to Volozhin, for example, the shtetl of Volozhin, I spoke about who was Reb Chaim Volozhin, who was a pupil of the Vilna Gaon, and he was the foundation stone of all the
modern yeshivas.
The modern yeshivot that came from the 1800s onwards were all built on his model. So we spoke about who was Reb Chaim Volozhin in Volozhin. So what we wanted to do was bring to life, it wasn't just going to see the cemeteries, we wanted to bring history to life and how it has impacted on the world. And we spoke about the vast spectrum of Zionism. Obviously we spoke about Rav Kook, but we also spoke about religious Zionism, secular Zionism, Yiddish, we sang Yiddish songs on the bus. We spoke about the Bundists, the socialist Jews, the communist Jews. We try to cover everything, and of course the whole world of the yeshivas. So we try to make it as comprehensive as possible.
Did you visit the kever of the Vilna Gaon? Because it was moved,
Yes.
Who's got quite a story to tell about that one?
Well, you can, Mignon, you'll share with us
Yes,
in
we've
a
got a
minute.
few minutes left.
Just a few minutes.
Well, you go for it.
Just to remind our listeners, this program is repeated this evening at 7 p.m.
On a previous visit of mine to Lithuania, I went to the synagogue in Vilna, and there was an old man that was praying next to me in the morning, and he was blind. And he started speaking to me in Yiddish, and I answered him, and we were talking. Thank God my grandmother lived with us, so I can speak Yiddish. And he said to me, "Willst du haben die Schlüssel von die Cave von die Gro? Do you want to have the key that opens up the mausoleum in which the Gaon of Vilna, one of the greatest rabbis that have ever lived in Vilna?" And I said that would be very nice, and I walked with him. I put my arm through his arm, and we went downstairs into the street. And that key shop, by the way, still exists to this day. I found it. He gave me a key. We copied the key. And then two of my friends that I was traveling with on that particular time, we went to the cemetery, and it actually opened up the metal gate into the mausoleum, because inside is the grave of the Gror and his wife and children. And next to him are the ashes of a righteous Gentile, Graf Pototsky, Avraham ben Avraham. And
had he not converted?
He had
converted.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
He was a righteous Gentile that converted to Judaism, and that's why he's Avraham ben Avraham. He converted to a Jew, and in fact,
he was burnt on the stake by his family.
Exactly. His family were Polish aristocrats, and because he had converted to Judaism, they burnt him at the stake on the grounds of the University of Vilna. And so I had the key with me after all the years, and our whole group went to the cemetery, and we stood around, and I took out the key, and I opened up the gate, and each person in a group was able to go inside, pay their respects, and say a quiet prayer while we were there, which was also quite amazing. So that was Vilna. Also, just one other thing we can talk about is that in Belarus we went to a place called Novardok. It's called Novgorod today. And we also found something very interesting, that there was an escape from the ghetto in Novgorod, where about 300 people had escaped into the forest, and that was that story of the Bielski brothers. That an amazing story In fact, there's a great documentary on the Bielski brothers.
Defiance.
Defiance. It's recommended watching for everybody. Try and get that movie Defiance. And we actually saw where they had excavated the hole in one of the sheds in the ghetto, and we tracked the tunnel under the walls. Well, the wall's gone today, but they've tracked the tunnel, and we actually followed it right out so that they could escape into the forest. And that was just such a beautiful, positive moment for us. And in fact, we had somebody in the group. Do you recall who it was?
Sue Sherman.
It was Sue Sherman again.
Sue
That's
Sherman
right.
again.
Sue Sherman again. Her uncle was one of those survivors that came out of the ghetto in Nevada.
You know, time has run out. We could go on for hours on this, and I hope you and Mina will come in again.
Thank you.
And we can
I'd love to.
continue. I'd love it, because my program on a Friday is called Reflections of the Past. And as I said right at the beginning, if you don't have a past, if you don't know your past, you don't have a future. So Hugh and Migno, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the studio.
Thank you, Isaac.
Just to
Thank you so
remind
much,
you
Isaac.
again, you can listen in at 7 p.m. this evening, or a few minutes thereafter. And then on Friday we have Reflections of the Past. Sunday we have the Art of the Cantor between 4 and 5. Thank you, Craig, for controlling. Go well, and don't forget, dress warm. It's very, very cold. It's raining, it's overcast, it's misty, but I'm sure the sun will come out soon. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank
We
you.
bring the news. We bring the action.
And
we bring
Hugh,
it
I
live.
was telling to make a
This is
podcast for you,
101.9
and you'll be able to get this.
She's
Thank you so much.
and she's
I hope it is all
You're a legend.
Oh, great, thank you. I hope I was going to.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig.
Now we must do another one. Hugh, I want to do one only on Lithuania. I was, with you. We can do it, say, in about a week or two's time. You know why? It's so vital the youngsters know
That
this.
story about the Puna Forest, I mean, where we actually, the
Oh, we forgot
archaeologists.
Punar.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started
Okay,
at
so
the last minute, with that sort of, that equipment.
Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. It's not the end of the world. The main thing is that.
Well done. Thank you.
Now, what's happening about that camera?
Thank you very much.
What's happening about the? Is it finished? Speak short.
Thank you.
So who's taking it? You. Hugh, are you taking it for Vicky Boston?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Was it recorded?
Ja, ik hoor het.
Okay, let me go and just speak to Vus.